Thank you very much. Good morning, colleagues from wherever you are. And we want to thank you for joining this MPA training. That is the first in a series that will be taking place in the region. We are happy that you would respond to the invitation to be part of this training. I want to start upfront by indicating that this training is an ongoing partnership between the Nairobi Convention, the Western Indian Ocean Marine Science Association, colleagues from SwAM, and we will have other colleagues who will be supporting the program as well from FOC as well. So we want to welcome all of you, and it is our hope that this program will be insightful, it will be productive, and indeed the experiences shared and learned will play a very important role in strengthening the management of MPAs across the region. So on behalf of the convention, because I will be making another presentation later, on behalf of the presentation, I want to welcome my colleague, Tim Andrew, from the convention. Is already here. He will make short remarks on behalf of the convention. I can introduce Tim briefly. Tim is a colleague who work together. He's in charge of our policy and governance work in the convention, and also responsible for creating synergies across different projects. Currently, Tim is also coordinating one of the CHEF-funded projects being executed by the convention, and the short form of the project is Sapphire. So Tim, you're welcome to make the short remarks as we continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Jared, and good morning, colleagues from Europe and from the Western Indian Ocean. Nice to see some familiar names. Yeah, just to the head of our secretariat, Dixon Waronge, asked me to just stand in for him this morning. He was called away, unable to be with us this morning. So here I am. I wanted to just welcome you on behalf of the Nairobi Convention. As Jared mentioned, this initiative is a partnership with the Western Indian Ocean Marine Science Association and our Swedish partners at the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management. So thank you for your input so far, especially colleagues from Sweden who are going to share, I think, today some of the experiences that they've had in their own national processes. And I guess we will discuss how some of those processes might be relevant for the Western Indian Ocean. And it's great to see representation from quite a number of the countries from the region. And hopefully we'll be able to share also some of the progress made from some of the countries in the region to contribute to the conversation around, especially around the strengthening of networks around MPAs in the region. This follows timelessly on from the recently launched Western Indian Ocean Marine Protected Area Network. I think that happened last week or the week before that. So I guess this could be considered as one of the first activities in support of that network, and I'm glad to see good representation from members of the network here. So involved from an early point in the process. Yeah, just to point out that, you know, the idea of developing a mechanism where MPA professionals could interact with each other, learn from each other, and support each other in their work is not new in the region. It has been tried before. There's been a group of experts of MPA practitioners that was in place several years ago. And there were some challenges of sustainability of that group. But I think even some of the members now who are still working within the region are we're part of that and will be part of the new group. So I'm also quite excited that this partnership maybe would address some of those issues around network formation and how networks can actually operate, to address those challenges that we've had before of maintaining a network and making it something that people wish to be part of, and energize the grouping of people that are involved. So that's, I'm looking forward to that, and maybe there'll be some good ideas around that aspect. This opportunity for capacity development around MPAs builds on, as I said, some previous attempts and activities in the past. I think one of the things that some of our network members were involved in several years ago through WIOMSA was some support from the US National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, and I do see some of the personalities that were involved in that from the region, also building by being part of this new initiative that's recently come on stream. So yeah, building on also WIOMSA's work around WIOCompass, which also brought together managers for a slightly different purpose, not necessarily around capacity development, but to try and institute, and very successfully so, institute a system where the experience and qualifications of professionals working within MPAs in the region is recognized. And I think that has been very successful, and professionals, I'm not sure of the numbers now, but I think it's well over 100 MPA professionals have been accredited through the WIOCompass program. This also builds on the very strong relationship between WIOMSA and the convention, particularly around MPAs is one of the important pillars where we have worked together. The convention draws very heavily on WIOMSA for technical support in much of the work that we do. Of particular interest also is the decisions of the countries in the past through various conference of parties that do support the development of a strong network of MPAs in the Western Indian Ocean, as well as looking at the ecosystem-based management approaches that can feed into improved ocean governance for our region. So it's very much this process and initiative around the MPAs is very much in line with the request of the countries of the region for certainly for the convention secretariat to facilitate work in this area. Yeah, and it also, builds on the initial work with Sweden and SwAM in particular, supporting the MSP process in the region. Many of you might know about the WIOSymphony process, which is really looking at cumulative impacts that could inform marine spatial planning processes. That's been going on, I think, for at least 18 months, discussions and various meetings with the regional partners, with the Marine Spatial Planning Technical Working Group that has been established in the region. So we've already had significant interaction with the Swedish team through SwAM, and we're very grateful to this ongoing support, which is in a slightly different direction from SwAM Ocean. and we will hear about what exactly this framework to support the network of MPAs might entail based on the Swedish experience later today. I'm also pleased that we will hear back from some of the countries on progress that they've made, so we can kind of take the best of what's been done at a global level, within Europe as well, and then also in the region, what lessons have been learnt that we can draw on to take the process forward. Yeah, so I'll leave it there, and looking forward to hearing what is presented, and just to welcome everybody again and thank you for your time this morning. And I hope that we all benefit from fruitful discussions. So thank you. Over to you, Jared.
Thank you very much, Tim, for those opening remarks, and which set, I guess, the tempo for the meeting. But we are also getting some short remarks from SwAM colleagues as well, please. And we can introduce ourselves as we make the remarks.
Sure. And Peter, I think you're muted.
Yes, Peter is muted.
Thank you.
Okay. Dear friends, on behalf of SIDA and my agency, I also would like to welcome you to this first seminar. And I have the opinion that this is a very timely action, and I hope that we will be able to start this process and to support the already ongoing in the region. And of course, we are very much dependent on the scientific knowledge that we are getting from WIOMSA regarding the status of the different critical habitats in the region. And our intention is that we should be with you for a long period, and we have targets. And I will be very short, because I think most of the that I would like to take up has already been used. And I really hope that this will be an active process, and I'm looking forward to our cooperation. And yeah, I'm very curious about the process now, and because we have been planning this so much, and I think we have a very good start now. So I'm looking forward to take part in this seminar. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter. Just a short comment. There's been some messages on the chat box about the translation of this meeting into French. Unfortunately, this is c'est pas prévu aujourd'hui. It's not foreseen for this seminar. I'm sorry about that. It will be all in English. So we will consider this for further events, but it was not planned for today. So I will continue now. My name is Javier Escute. I work for FOS Europe. We are supporting SwAM in this project, and we will be organizing this seminar today and trying to make sure that we can deliver everything that we have planned. Just as a reminder, the aim of this event today is to increase awareness on adaptive management for MPAs, for marine protected areas, hoping that this can help us all as practitioners and conservationists to do a better job in protecting nature, biodiversity, and human well-being linked to that. We also aim to provide some insight, some inspiration, hopefully, on how MPAs and frameworks of MPAs and standardizing the system of managing marine values and marine biodiversity can help us be more effective. So that's the aim behind this seminar today. We also aim, as it was described in the concept note, to provide a bit of a forum so we can have a bit of discussion, hoping to be a starting point of further work together. And as it's been said before, this is not starting now, so this is just building up on lots of other initiatives and projects that have been happening before. So today we will have some presentations. Jared, that you all know really well, will provide the first introduction to the results of the Outlook report. Then we will have Jenny Hertzmann from SwAM and Ilke Tilders from FOS Europe presenting the framework, the experience built up with the MPA network in Sweden, and how standardizing this management of MPAs can provide some added value. So the sum of the parts, it's beyond the sum of the parts when we talk about frameworks. Then we will have also an introduction to the SwAM program, the Ocean program, and that's going to be led by Jenny Hertzmann again and Annette Olsson from FOS Europe. And we will also have a presentation from South Africa. And for this, we thank Dr. Anne Oud-Tusen, and I'm sorry for the mispronunciation that I'm really sure I did, but you will be sharing the experience of also a framework for capacity development in South Africa and how these can inspire us all as well for other work we are doing. I would like to mention as well the critical work, and I think WIOMSA and Arthur Tuda's name has been mentioned already quite a few times, but most of the work that it's being presented today, especially the Outlook report, it was all built on this research and thinking around all these MPAs in the region. So I would like to make sure that everybody is aware that this contribution is critical for all the work we are building up with the Ocean program here. Finally, I would like to make a small request from you. It would be really helpful if you could help us renaming yourself in the meeting. And Annette, please, thank you for copying really small instructions that you could click on your video feed and make sure that your name it's been written next to your video feed, so we can know who's talking in every moment, and we can track the questions from the chat box, so we can organize it a bit easily. So if you could take just a few seconds to make sure that you have your name spelled out as participant in this meeting, that would be really helpful. And I think we can move on to the agenda for today. This is the same list of items that you received on the invitation, but just to make sure that we are all okay today, we will be talking about the first overview. The Outlook report on MPA effectiveness will be presented in a few days, but it is just a bit of the framework that justifies and explains why we are having this seminar today, and the Ocean program is building up on all this work, as we said. We will give some details, really brief presentation of what the Ocean program is aiming to achieve. And then talking about this example, the framework for the design and effective management of MPA networks, a case from Sweden, and then the case from South Africa on a framework for capacity development. We hope to finish around 12 East African time. So that means 11 Central European time for the Europeans joining us, with a few conclusions and last remarks by the end. As stated before, this meeting is recorded and will be shared afterwards, as well as the documents that we'll be using today. Right. So with further ado, I think it's time to start with the first presentation. And Jared, I would like to ask you to start by sharing your screen and leading us through this introduction on the Outlook report. Thanks for that. Over to you, Jan.
Xavier, thank you very much. And I'm sharing my screen. So as Xavier has mentioned, I'm going to give a brief highlight of the status in terms of where we are concerning the Western Indian Ocean Marine Protected Areas Outlook that has been under development for the last almost 4 years. I must say, without any fear of contradiction, that this has been a very long process because the MPA outlook had to be validated and approved by all governments in the region. So while it took long, but we are very happy that the process has deepened the ownership of the outlook across the region. And from the status of, as I give this presentation, we'll be able to appreciate where we are. Actually, even the workshop that we are convening this morning is one of the major recommendations from the outlook. So some recommendations are already being implemented. So it has been an experience of great collaboration between the contracting parties of the Nairobi Convention, because the outlook has a chapter for every country concerning the establishment, management of their MPAs and opportunities for expansion. It has been a great collaboration between the experts on working on MPAs across the region. It has also been a great collaboration between the convention and the Western Indian Ocean Marine Science Association that has played a very, very important role in the technical coordination of the production of this outlook. Now, so the convention has supported contracting parties in the production of this outlook, and the ambition was to track the progress that governments have made towards SDG 14.5, especially, under which governments had made commitments to conserve at least 10% of their coastal and marine areas by 2020, which was actually last year. But most significantly, the outlook is also serving as a baseline for the post-2020 global biodiversity framework discussions currently going on, because the outlook is being launched this year, which is the same year that we are starting this super decade. So the information and data that has been captured in the outlook will serve as a baseline for the global biodiversity framework targets as well. It has been a long process. I may not have to go through all the details, but the process started in 2017, and there have been a number of right shops, experts from different countries working together through this production process. As I mentioned, there have been very extensive review and validation processes. Actually, as a matter of fact, the outlook is now done, but we asked countries to give any final comment they may have before the outlook is launched. And the countries within the last 2 weeks have given us their final comments, which are finalizing now. The editorial design has been done, layout, and we are now preparing for the launch, which will be held on the 16th of July, which is just slightly less than a month from today. Now, this outlook is implementing one of the COP9 decision, where the Secretariat of the Convention was requested to work jointly with the contracting parties to periodically prepare thematic outlooks on the state of the marine and coastal environment, including marine protected areas and critical habitats outlook. Yeah, so the production of this outlook is actually responding to this COP decision. So what are the key products and the outcomes of this?
Jared?
Yes?
We are stuck on the first slide. I don't know if it's just me.
Now, can someone else confirm? Are you still on the first slide?
Yes.
We're seeing your editing.
Yeah, it's stuck.
Yeah.
Now, that's unfortunate. Then it means that I am going to present without being on slide mode. I don't know why that is the case.
Yeah, but this is fine. We now see slide 6. Yeah.
We're with you now.
Excellent. So then I'm going to do without. Sometimes it gets stuck when it is on slide mode. So I will do without slide mode, and you should be able to.
That's fine.
Yeah. So it's a pity you have missed some of those, but not the most interesting part. The most interesting parts are yet to come. Now, now some of the key outputs of this process, of course, include the MPA outlook, We are also producing a sister outlook that is called the Critical Habitats Outlook. This will be completed by end of August this year. Then we will also produce a recommendations outlook, which will combine recommendations from the MPA outlook and the Critical Habitats Outlook. We have actually produced a dashboard for the MPA outlook as well, which shows trends on establishment and management of MPAs across the region. So there will be a number of products that will be produced as a result of this process. There will also be a number of secondary products as well, which will include policy briefs and other products. One of the important secondary output is the setting up of a regional MPA network. And as we have mentioned before, during the World Oceans Day, indeed, the Western Indian Ocean Marine Protected Areas Network was indeed launched, which was a major recommendation from this outlook in partnership with the WIOMSA as well. Who has been involved in the process? As I mentioned, there has been a story of great collaboration. The Nairobi Convention, of course, the Secretariat coordinating and giving oversight. WIOMSA has played a very, very important role in terms of the technical coordination of the process that included review and managing contributions. We have also had MPA specialists, from different countries being part of the process. Among others, most critically, we have had the convention focal points and the senior government officials playing a very important role in reviewing, validating, and approving their respective country chapters. So this is the structure of the MPA Outlook. I wouldn't give a lot of details because the launch will be on 16th of July next month. This is how the structure looks like. But if I talk about part 1, deals with the structure, purpose, and methodology. Part 2, context of the outlook. Part 3 has the country MPA chapters from the countries of the region. And part 4 deals with MPA effectiveness assessment that was done for slightly over 100 MPAs in the region. And part 5 is a summary of the outlook. The country chapters, this is how they are structured. Each country chapter has a country overview, MPA overview, marine areas under protection, proposed MPAs as countries move towards their SDG 14.5 and now the Global Biodiversity Framework targets. But significantly, there's also a section which deals with non-formal protected areas, which include, LLMAs, among other designations. Now, the challenge of not being on slide mode, then we lose a bit of details, but some of the cover pages for the different countries, like this is the one for Comoro here, the French territories for France. I think this is the one for Mozambique as well. A number of maps have also been produced for MPAs of each country across the region. There have also been case studies that have been published as part of the network. One of those is the Mihari network of LLMAs in Madagascar. We have the Seychelles Marine Spatial Planning Initiative as a case study, and another one on MPA governance in Kenya. In total, we actually have 13 case studies. I have used these 3 as an illustration. What are the key findings of the outlook? We have 144 MPAs across the region, covering about 9,000 square kilometers, and this represents 8.51 of the total EEZ area for the region. Interestingly, 48% of the area under protection at the moment was brought under protection between 2015 and 2019, which means that the SDG agenda may have enhanced the momentum of governments increasing the areas that they have under protection across the countries, which is very, very positive. Another important observation from the outlook is that there exists legislative and institutional frameworks that support the establishment and of MPAs across the region, and also community participation is key, as was evidenced through the number of locally managed marine areas that have been established across the different countries. Some challenges, of course, were observed as well. which include weak enforcement and compliance, which is a major challenge, inadequate financial and personnel capacity, climate change and pollution, among some of the key threats facing the management of MPS. And there's also increased footprint of coastal development, either through urbanization or the expanding coastal developments like ports, among others. What are the key recommendations that we are having from this outlook? Sustainable financing is an important consideration to support, infrastructural support, capacity building, and effective enforcement. The challenge of law enforcement and compliance will be one area that has to be clearly looked at. Education and awareness programs among various stakeholders will be important so that the role and the contribution of MPS to local and national economies and biodiversity conservation can be appreciated by stakeholders at different levels. Of course, one of the recommendations was the establishment of a regional framework for MPA capacity development. And we are happy that the workshop that we actually have this morning is directly addressing this particular recommendation. So in terms of capacity building, we are happy about this collaboration between SwAM, WIOMSA, and the convention. We will be having a capacity development program targeting MPA managers and other stakeholders in the region. There will also be support to countries to support MPA management plans where these needs may exist. But significantly, the convention has also supported the development of a regional ecosystem indicator monitoring framework. When this is completed, we hope that it will also strengthen, the monitoring, assessment, and eventual management of MPS across the region. We must also continue to work on pipeline funding to address the challenge of sustainable financing in the management of MPS. So colleagues, as I finish my presentation, many of you may have received the save date. If it has not come, you will receive it. We will be having the MPA Outlook being launched on the 16th of July. And we are looking forward to having all of you during this launch. So Xavier, I would like to stop there. And thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you.
Thanks, Jared, for this brief introduction to the Outlook report and all the work that has been done. As you say, it will be fully presented in a few days, and we are all looking forward to that presentation. So now, in the interest of time, I would propose to move forward and see the next introduction on the ocean program. We will have a few minutes to discuss afterwards. And if you have any burning questions, you can write it on the chat box. Annette and myself, we will keep track of what's being written so we can address as many questions as possible during the seminar today. In any case, if there's any questions that are not answered because we cannot cover everything, we can also use the chat. The presenters can also use the chat to respond, or we can do it afterwards. Okay, so let's get back and present the ocean program. And for this, I would pass the word to Jenny to start the presentation. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Xavier. You can hear me well?
Yes.
Yeah, good, perfect. Thank you very much. Jenny Hertzman is my name, and I work at SwAM. I work mainly with marine protection in Sweden, though not in the WIO region so much yet. I will first now present a bit about SwAM, what that is, and quite briefly about SwAM Ocean, what that's about. SwAM Ocean is our program to reduce poverty through sustainable use of the ocean. Yeah, you can take the next slide. SwAM stands for the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management, and we work directly under the government, under the parliament, and we have a task to protect not only the marine resources, but also freshwater ones. So we work with all water. We want to protect, we want to restore, and we want to make sure that the resources are used in a sustainable way. In our agency, we have marine spatial planning, as also I think it was Tim that mentioned that we also work with the marine spatial planning in the WIO region. And we also have fisheries management within our agency. But we have to work very close to other national authorities all the time to make sure that we use the sea in a good way. You can take the next. And this picture that you see on the right, that's my daughter, Siri. She is 4.5 or 5.5 years old, and she's looking for life below the sea. Life below water is one of the SDGs as well. One of the SDGs that our SwAM Ocean Development Cooperation aims for. Number one also, no poverty, is the main ambition, the main impact that we want to achieve with this. Because we humans, we need nature to survive. We need the oceans to be able to work with economic and social development. We want strong and resilient ecosystems. And that's what SwAM Ocean is about. We want to use those ecosystems in a good and smart way, but not only for some people, but for all people. So we work with capacity development. We believe in strong capacity to be able to plan for a future of the oceans, but also to take care and protect the oceans and to use the ocean in this smart, sustainable way for the joy and benefit of all. You can take the next slide. So as some mentioned before, I think it was Tim as well, that we work with 3 different thematic areas within SwAM Ocean. We work with marine spatial planning. We work with blue economy, sustainable use of the resources. Here we include all kinds of fisheries, but also other uses. And I mainly work with the marine protection, with conservation of marine values. Of course, you need a quite tight collaboration between those management areas. They are interacting all the time and dependent on each other. We need collaboration between sectors, between different stakeholders. I don't really have a pointer, but on the right-hand side, you see the theory of change of SwAM Ocean program. So we have those 3 thematic areas: sustainable use, protection, and marine spatial planning that together should collaborate, of course. We need transparent processes, and we hope that this that we can build a strong capacity and then have a sustainable ocean governance that fulfill also the social requirements, democracy, human rights, and gender, to mention some. And in the long term, this will get the opportunities to be better for people to get richer lives. Can take the next slide. And here we have your region. So what has Sweden to do with the WIO region, you think? Yeah, you can think about that. We have very different ambience, but we have the same things that we need to fulfill. We work with the WIO region, as you see here, all the coast of Eastern Africa and the islands. We have some focal countries within the SwAM Ocean program. You see them on the top left, the Comoros, Madagascar, Mozambique, Tanzania, and Somalia. But we also work with the region as a whole. Peter mentioned in the beginning that this program has been going on for some years, so we are really keen on getting started now. It's 2 years left of this program period, but we are pretty sure that this will be prolonged in another way maybe, but a longer program, because we really want to make an effort in this region. And the whole program is financed by SIDA, the Swedish development organization. Can take the next. So in this theme of marine protection, we work with the adaptive management. I mean, in Sweden, we work, of course, a lot with protection in different kinds. And as Jared and Tim mentioned, this outlook report and all the things, all the ambitions that is going on in the WIO region really impresses me deeply. It's so much strategic and good work going on, so many initiatives. So we really had to think, what are the pearls that SwAM and Sweden could could take to the bioregion to find out what do we think is the best way of having an exchange of experiences. And here we think that our work with adaptive management is really crucial thing. We have during many years worked with this, the conservation standards, or the open standards for the practice of conservation, that I think some of you recognize as a tool, because we like you really stands in a position where we don't have unlimited resources. We need to really focus our work. We need to really know where to put our efforts and where to invest our activities, so we don't just throw them into the sea. Well, throw them into the sea is good, but not in the right place, kind of. So we want an effective conservation. We want to work results-based, and that's why we work with the conservation standards. You can take the next or click one time. Thank you. So what we think we can do is to strengthen this capacity in marine management, or to make sure that you get a successful adaptive management. We have both good and bad experiences, but we want to exchange those experiences. We think that it's of course necessary with the transparent and participatory processes, not only between protection and fisheries, but with a lot of different stakeholders. And we think that you have in the bioregion an extremely good arena for this cooperation. You have the WIOMSA in place since many years. You have the WIOMPAM network, and you have this Outlook report to work with. So we have so many things to start with. And what we have done the latest year that I will talk about in some minutes is this framework of a network of marine protected areas. And this is this pearl that I think Sweden has, that we can actually transform to your region. I will hand over to Annette, and she will tell you a bit how we will work the last 2 years within this program. So thank you, and welcome, Annette.
Thank you, Jenny. Hi, everybody. My name is Annette Olsen. I'm a colleague of Xavier with FOS Europe. So you can go to the next slide, Xavier. So as Jenny was just saying, one of the pieces of the SwAM ocean work is to develop capacity around adaptive management and MPAs. We have been going through a process of figuring out how the SwAM ocean can add the most value to do this within the bioregion. We have consulted with Jared and the Nairobi Convention, with WIOMSA, IUCN, and the WIOMPAN network to try and work out what are those key challenges and where can we add the value in giving support. So these are some of the challenges that has come up and that we have looked at, and they span from the challenges around process for designating new marine protected areas and the tasks of reaching the new biodiversity targets, updating existing poor or outdated management plans. How do we use existing information and build that into management plans around climate change and addressing that? The operationalization of management plans, so turn them into action and move from paper parks to effective management, including sort of work planning and monitoring. Challenges around how to increase the buy-in for MPAs at different levels, and really understanding the value and articulating the value of MPAs. Then there's the network approach, why and how to design coherent networks of MPAs in the region, which is what we're going to be looking a little bit at today. And looking at the bigger picture of a systems approach for integrated marine management and how MPAs are one piece of that bigger puzzle that kind of goes hand in hand with marine spatial planning and other topics as well. You can go to the next one. So we, during our sort of consultation period, narrowed it down to some things that the SwAM Ocean project think we can really add value to. And we have then decided to do a series of capacity development initiatives. And we have kind of two streams of that. We have a series of seminars, of which you're in the first one now, which are really aimed at providing inspiration on how to address some of these issues around adaptive management in the region. So the three topics that we have cooked up based on our input is the first one here, framework, MPA network design and management, using this what Jenny calls the pearl from Sweden, this example that you're going to hear about very shortly. Another topic that we will design a seminar around is this designating of new MPAs. How do we engage stakeholders and include measures to adapt and increase resilience in the face of climate change? And the last one will be around the topic of updating and operationalizing MPA management plans, and really get the most out of their potential for adaptive management. So this is the stream of seminars, and we're in the first one now. We are planning the seminars 2 and 3 for later in the year, around September. They are not fully set in stone yet, but we are working on that. We are aiming on using some regional examples for these seminars as well. So it's still a little bit of a work in progress on planning for that, and there'll be more information coming on that later once we're fully ready. I think, Shabby, you can go to the next one. Great. So the other thing we will be doing on capacity development is some more detailed and in-depth training that are aimed at MPA managers and teams that are on the ground working with sites. So we are planning on rolling these out between sort of later in the year now and in 2022 until December. We are looking at supporting 4 to 5 teams from within the region. And it's going to be a series of more detailed workshops, 8 to 10 workshops, and coaching in between, going through all the different steps of the conservation standards cycle. So we are really excited about that. And the same thing, we're still in the process of planning for this, and we need to figure out which teams and how to go about that. But yeah, the plan is for this to start up later in the year. And of course, we are having an eye on other initiatives going on in the region. So for example, the IUCN Green List and the mentorship program, that we'll be collaborating whenever possible, and with others, of course, when it is relevant. So yeah, that is the plan. I think, Shabby, you can go to the next one. I think that wraps this session up. I don't know if there are any clarifying questions for Jenny or myself on this piece here before we move on.
Yeah, we have a few minutes in case there's some clarifying questions here. We will have a bit of time after the last presentation on the designing networks and the case from South Africa. In case we can have a really short discussion there. I see there are no, the question that was on the chat box has been covered by Yared. Thanks for that. I don't see any other standing questions unless I'm mistaken. So I would, unless there's any burning thing, quick reaction here, no? Then I would move and pass it to Jenny again, and to present, as we were saying, this case from Sweden about how we can, or how we could approach and what are the benefits of approaching the work with MPA networks at different levels, country level, regional level, and how working with the same kind of pieces of the puzzle, standardizing, has been useful for the Swedish case, and what are the nice things about it and the benefits, with the hope that we can inspire thinking in the WIO region. So with no further things, Jenny, you want to take over? Thanks for that.
Yes, thank you. Can you see my screen? Well,
yes, we can. Yeah.
Perfect. Tell me if something is wrong, because I don't really see what you see.
Okay.
So thanks again. So this is the pearl. This is what I want to talk to you about. The framework of a network of MPAs in Sweden. So I think the network is a key thing here. We work with a network and a framework. We will tell you about what it is, me and Ilke together. I will start talking about the framework a bit, the components of the framework, and Ilke will continue after that, talking a bit about the method and the step-by-step process, because it's composed it's a framework that we then want to concretize with the method to know how you can work with it in a more practical way. Let's see how I switch. No, like this. Does it change? No. Yeah. Did you get the new picture?
Yes.
Yes, good. It's a bit slower.
It's working.
So, yeah, cool. No, I just want to put you into the Swedish context first, so you know where we are. I mean, Sweden is far north. We do have African heat here today, at least where I sit. It's around 25-30 degrees, but normally it's not always that hot. We have an east coast, a long east coast to the Baltic Sea, and on the west we have some part of coastline that belongs or borders to the Atlantic Sea. So here is where Sweden is situated, and you see that there are 3 different blue colors, and that's the different marine regions that we work with, both within marine spatial planning, but also within this work of a network of MPAs. And what has the Baltic Sea to do with the warm waters outside East Africa? Well, we do have the same commitments as you do. You talked about the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Aichi targets, where number 11 states that we should protect at least 10% of the marine waters. We also work with that, and now we are trying to scale up to 30% even. And I put this picture also of the SDGs that was also mentioned. I like this picture very much, where you have the biosphere in the bottom. It's actually the fundament. It's the ground for having a society development and an economical development. It doesn't mean that biosphere is more important than society or economy. Or maybe I believe so in my heart, but it doesn't say that. It's only saying that the biosphere is actually a condition for having the other parts. So I think this picture is pretty well. And we all work with this. And you mentioned that this was actually a good ambition for the WIO region to really get the work on MPAs going. So I think it has a good importance. In the Aichi targets, we twisted it a bit, but we have an international commitment in Sweden that says this: an effectively managed, ecologically representative, well-connected and functional network of formally protected marine areas should cover at least 10% of the Swedish marine waters. Sounds beautiful. It's nice words. And the 10% is quite concrete. We can work with that. That's the area, that's the quantity we want. But all those things, management, representativity, coherence, functionality, is quality things. This is the things that is a bit tricky, a bit harder. How do we work with that? How do we concretize this? We had the governmental task at SwAM to work with those things. So SwAM did an analysis, SwAM, my agency, did an analysis of the marine protection in Sweden. And we found out, we are doing pretty good. We have I will put on the point, we have like 14% already protected altogether. We have 32% on the west coast, 16% in the Baltic proper, and 5% in the north of the Baltic. Altogether 14%, doing pretty well. But when you look a bit deeper into this, you can see that the distribution of the MPAs of the marine protection is not so well distributed. The representativity is not there. And how do we know if this is effective or not? Is the marine protection an effective tool for the marine world, or is it not? So we had to go from vision to national action plan. We had to fulfill some of those steps. Here you see 5 things that we needed to work on behalf of the government. This study was made in 2016. And we had to put some more in place. We needed more marine protection. We needed to strengthen the current protection, the restrictions within the current one. We had to work with the national framework that I will soon talk a bit more about. How do we work with the concepts and processes and definitions? Evidence-based data gathering, things like that. I mean, you think that it's so many people working with marine protection and marine issues in Sweden, but to find the data, that's not so easy. It's scattered all over, and it's hard to draw conclusions here. And we live in a changing world. We need to adapt to climate change, for example, an obvious example, but we also need to adapt to alien species coming in. We need to adapt to social conditions, the pandemic, for example. So adaptive management is a crucial ingredient as well in this. But I will talk to you about the national framework. And framework, what is a framework? Some people are not so familiar with this wording, but the framework is what it sounds like. It sets the frames, the principles, the directions, the theory of change, and the structure for our work. So here we have those principles, but also within the framework, we have a description of the process of how to work with the principles and the directions, and a step-by-step method that Ilke will talk you through later. So the framework is the overarching thing. That, I think, is also easy to adapt to any case. This could work in the WIO region. This could work on a terrestrial site, if that's possible. We have developed those guidelines, so they will be easy to put onto some other context of case. So listen up when we talk about it, because I think this could be interesting for the WIO. Connected to the framework, we have 3 regional action plans, 1 for each submarine region. This is actually an implementation, you could say, of the method where we tried it out. We developed at least 2 of the regional plans in a very parallel interactive process within the framework. So we tested the framework and adjusted it, so it's done on the same time. And I know that you have a nice dashboard in the WIO as well. We also find that we need a dashboard that really gathers the data. We really have a good base for taking formal decisions on marine protection. So this is also a crucial part, and they are all interconnected, but framed in by the framework. So I will talk a bit about this framework, what the main components are. I mean, we don't have so much time. I could talk a whole day, and I won't, but I will give you a teaser and think of questions, think of how this can relate to your work that you are doing also when we are talking. So first of all, the backbone of the framework, the theory of change behind, is pretty simple. So we want this, an ecologically representative, coherent, functional, effectively managed network of MPAs. So the only thing we really is after is to have a sufficient protection, a good protection of our marine values. And we want threats, human activities that are harmful. We want them avoided, take them away. And then we think that the status of our key marine species and habitats is doing well. So nothing strange. This is our basic theory of change. So I will go through to you the concepts that we fill this theory of change and framework with. And you could also think, I've been working more than 10 years designating MPAs and writing management plans. And I get surprised now that I haven't worked with my colleagues in my neighboring counties, very close to where I live. We haven't had a good collaboration before. So we work all on our own site, and we have more or less the same big aims and ambitions, but a slightly different wording, slightly different definitions. And how could you compare on a national level of that? So we had to work a lot on the language here. So one of the things that we have worked a lot is to define those key terms, those criteria. What do we mean nationally and together on, for example, connectivity? What are all those key terms, key criteria? And what is a network of MPA? Then we have to know what are the components of this network, what species, what key species, and what habitats do we need to work with? So we have to define the components. And we had some guiding principles, some preset things that we needed to adapt to that were, for example, the 10% and now scaling up to 30%. We have to work ecosystem based and so on. We had some guiding principles to follow. All those things, we were more than 60 people working together during several years to find out those things. And some of the criteria I will talk to you about. I will start with functionality. And a functional MPA network maintains or improves the status of the key ecosystems and habitats that we want to protect. But to be able to say something about this functionality, we need this list of species and habitats. We need a list of our targets that we are agreeing on. So that was a crucial thing to produce altogether. And we also need to know what we are aiming for. We need a clear description of the goals. What is the condition we are after? If one of our targets is seagrass beds, what do we mean with a good seagrass bed? Is that a special density or a special depth distribution or whatever? What are the quality aspects that we are aiming for? When are we satisfied? I know I run over you with information here, sorry for that. But I move on to the next thing. The next key term is representativity. A representative MPA network has geographically well-distributed relevant proportions of the ecosystems and key species that we are after. So here we want the proportion of every key species and habitat that we want to protect to have representativity. Again, we need this list of our targets, the list of species and habitats. And we also need to know how much of each species and target do we need to protect to have this distribution. And this we have to do a bit on marine regional scale, marine region scale, I would say. We call those protection objectives. So the proportion of seagrass bed, the proportion of blue mussels, the proportion of recruitment areas for fish, for example. How much? Next term is connectivity. So, or coherence. A well-connected network or marine protected area has a functioning exchange of genes and individuals between different ecosystems or habitats. And this, if it's a good exchange, it needs quite good quality of the ecosystems, and also size matters a lot. Bigger areas has much better opportunities. And here we also have this corridors or green infrastructure that we talk about that is important. We have worked a bit on science here to understand how the different species in the Baltic Sea, at least, how far they spread. So we know the distance, But we have some work still on this issue with connectivity. We need to define this further into the framework to get a good grip of that. So here we have to work a bit more. Here is also interesting for the why, I think, because we have to work on different scales. So we have to look, we can look at the national scale, but also regional scale and on local scale on each county, each district. So here we can work a lot with connectivity to have this distribution much more well done than just having MPs where they are easy to create or whatever. Here we have to have a good distribution and think of scale a bit. Effective management is the next term. An MPA network is effectively managed if the targets are sufficiently protected, the negative effects, the threats of human activities are reduced, and favorable conservation status is achieved. This is more or less our theory of change. But here we need to know what human activities will negatively impact our targets. We need a list of threats here. And that sounds pretty easy. It's a box in my PowerPoint, but that has been a headache. That has been several workshops, so much work going on and forth to just have these lists, because you have so many different lists, national lists, HELCOM lists, you have IUCN list and the EU directives list. We had to really harmonize them and find out what list is suitable for this work and still not too different. So here we put a lot of work, even though it's just one box. We also needed to know how much of the human activities should be reduced. So we set up something we call threat reduction objectives. And we needed to know how human activities should be regulated. So we put up regulation objectives. And all this fits in to our theory of change. You remember this picture where we had a very simple one, sufficient protection, harmful human activities should be reduced or avoided, and the status of our marine world is good. So here we put in those concepts or those components that we talked about. We have protection objectives, the proportion here. We have regulation objectives and the sufficient protection. So we know if we protect enough of aerial targets, and we also know if the restrictions are good enough. For the threats, we have the taxonomy of threats, the list of threats, and we have our threat reduction objectives. And when we come to the status of our key species and habitats, we have scope and vision that I didn't talk about, but that's one step. We have the taxonomy of targets, and we have the goals for the nested targets. So we all fit them in to our very simple theory of change. Okay, so this is quite good, but still there are some questions. So we identified some management questions to understand really what we needed to know. What do we need to get answer on? So we need to know also if this is functional. Does it work? Does our tool, marine protected areas, really make a difference in nature? So the question, you don't have to read all the questions, but the highlighted one here, is there enough protection of the right species and habitats? That's a simple common sense question. Do we have the right protection at the right spot? But it's not obvious that we had that in Sweden. We had a lot of MPAs, but we haven't always exactly the knowledge on where and how, but we need that. So we have to connect that to the data so we can really pinpoint and make sure that what data do we need. So here, connected to the same question, we need data on how much of each target is currently protected and where. So we need to know where do we have our seagrass beds in Sweden and where are they protected and how much percentage is that of the whole thing. So that we need the data on. And we all know that data in the marine world is quite hard, but we have to do what we can with what we have, more or less. Next step is also the analysis that we need to do, an analysis of how much of each nested target needs to be protected. This is the process of setting the protection objectives, which is also quite hard work. Another headache that we worked pretty hard on to really know what proportion is representative for Sweden and in each region. So this has been also a pretty hard work to do that, to set those protection objectives. The same thing goes for the threats, for the negative human activities. We need an analysis to know what are the seagrass beds sensitive against. What human activities can you actually do in an area and what can you not do? What is the sensitivity? So that's also one thing that is extremely important. And also here you have connections to the work done in the marine spatial planning and the symphony work. You also have a sensitivity analysis there to be able to guide how to work with this. I have one more slide, which I think also is pretty important to show. We talked a lot about those different scales to work. And I think this also can apply for the WIO region, because here we work in Sweden on a national scale, and we have 3 marine subregions. And then we have counties, districts, or whatever you call them. And we have, I think, 11 in the Baltic Sea, and each county has individual MPAs. And I think this is the same thing more or less. Instead of national, you have the whole WIO region that you might want to divide into submarine regions. And then you have different countries instead of counties maybe, and different numbers of MPAs or counties. Maybe there is one more scale. And we think the same in Sweden. We are not there yet. We have worked with the national framework for Sweden, but this can also be scaled up to the whole Baltic Sea. I mean, it makes more sense to work with a marine network in the Baltic, which is one big sea basin. So we are discussing now with HELCOM, which is a convention in the Baltic Sea, on how to scale up this work as well. And that's one of the really success factors, I think, that you can work on those different scales with the same frames, with the same system, the same structure, but you fill it with different levels of details, more or less. Okay, thank you. I will hand over to Ilke, and you can introduce yourself because I didn't do that. And she will continue with the step-by-step process, and we can take questions by the end, I think.
Great, Jenny. Thank you for that. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ilke Tilders. I work for FOS Europe. We are an organization specialized in conservation planning and management, adaptive management, most of all. And FOS has been involved in the development of the framework that Jenny has just introduced to you, and in the application of this framework in the design and management of 2 regional marine protected area networks in Sweden. And what we've done is we've captured the learning and put it in a step-by-step guidance. So it's really developed on the basis of application. And we thought that by capturing it in a step-by-step guidance, it might help others that are about to design and manage a marine protected area network be more able to apply this framework or components of the framework that Sweden is now using. Next slide, please. So I'm picking up where Jenny left off. Of course, the good explanation around the theory of change, very simplistic theory of change. Which is nothing more than saying if you protect things, then the threats will be reduced or avoided, and the status of key marine habitats and species inside marine protected areas are restored or maintained. And of course, that's a simplistic view because it assumes that all of the impacts are caused by human use inside the area. The reality is, of course, a bit more complex, but this is our starting point. Jenny has introduced these very many components, and we have tied them to different steps. So you see the different steps here highlighted on this slide. I'll take you through one by one to give you a bit of an overview. There are 10 of them. Next slide, please, Jenny. You can click a few times, if you will, for this entire thing to appear. So step one would be to really understand what it is you're applying this framework to. And to form a good team, a team that is purposeful and able to fulfill this, this planning exercise, ideally also involved in the management of the Marine Protected Area Network. Step two is then to delineate your marine region and to jointly craft a vision. And the more participatory you do that, the more powerful your vision statement is. Step three is then to kind of like figure out together what it is you're really trying to protect, your key habitats and species that you are going to use to get an idea of whether your marine protected areas are indeed effective. You set goals for them in step 4. Goals are very concrete statements of how you want these targets to look like, how much of what, in what condition you would like them to be. Step 5 then is to develop protection objectives. Given these goals, how much of what do we need to protect where? Step number 6 is another step that is important. It is about figuring out how sensitive these nested targets are to the different human uses in a region. Step 7 is then using that information to identify and formulate threat reduction objectives. So threat reduction objectives are things like that trawling doesn't happen in shallow areas with, for example, sensitive corals. Regulation objectives follow very closely. Trawling is forbidden in areas with coral, so they're very closely related. Step number 8 is formulated as step number 8, but is of course is throughout the process, throughout all these steps, an important basis. It's strengthening that evidence base, trying to collate and improve the body of evidence you have in order to understand where your nested targets are, if you're meeting your goals, your protection objectives, etc., in order to, and then that's step number 9, formulate priority actions. Priority actions are those actions that you agree on that kind of like fill the biggest gaps in your regional plans. And of course, all of that needs to happen in a sound governance structure and an adaptive management process. So you need to figure out how often you sit together, how you use data to answer these complicated questions, take decisions together, who takes decisions, how is it financed, etc. So that's spelled out in step number 10, the governance structure. Many of these steps that you see are of course nothing new, and I'm sure that you're covering many, if not all of them already in your processes. I guess we did the same in Sweden, but putting them together really in a very methodological way has revealed many opportunities to link them together. And that's where the strength happens, by really making one flow after the other. Next slide, please. The core of this framework is highly inspired by the use of the conservation standards. These conservation standards are a set of best practices that have been co-created by many organizations. You can see part of them here on the right in all their beautiful logos. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk a little bit about these steps on a very high level. And I must say that there is a lot more to each one of these steps, and you can find more information in the guidelines, in the framework and guidelines document that will be launched later this week or next week. We're about to have everything translated in English as well and share it with you. So we'll make sure you get access to that as well. Step number 1 is about really nailing the purpose of your work. In the case of Sweden, it was pretty clear. We wanted to develop regional plans for 2 of these marine regions. So we wanted a regional plan for the Botnian Bay, and we wanted a regional plan for the Baltic proper. Next slide, please. And you can click a few times to fill up this slide, if you will. We spent considerable time in composing teams, and for these regional planning, what we needed is somebody that's clearly in the lead. We needed people from all the constituent counties, so all the different administrative units that have a responsibility for marine protected area management and designation. We needed the teams to be complemented with experts in methodology, but also in GIS, in legal things, in climate change, etc., etc. Next slide, please. The next step then is to define the scope and a vision. I'm going to be short about this. Next slide, please. Defining the scope is actually nothing more and nothing less than the exact delineation, geographic delineation of your marine region. And that marine region is then your unit for planning, for thinking. In Sweden, we have followed the logic that the 3 marine regions of the Gulf of Bothnia, the Baltic proper, and Västerhavet, you might want to point them out, Jenny. So the first one is the Gulf of Bothnia. You see that that one is positioned in a pretty closed basin. It is almost freshwater, believe it or not. So there are species that are in many other parts of the world only found in freshwater that you can find here in a marine habitat. And as you move down, that region is called the Baltic proper. That one is already a little bit more saline. And then you move out into the North Atlantic and you come to the Västerhavet region, the West Sea region. And that one is fully Atlantic in conditions. And what you can see is that these units have been very helpful because they're not only ecologically pretty distinct, but they also have a distinct number of counties, of coastal counties that are implied. So not everyone is involved in every region, just the coastal counties. But it's also the same logic that marine spatial planning is using, and that helps us to build bridges between marine spatial planning and marine protected area network thinking in the context of integrated marine management. Is a very important component. We've used on one side the coastline, on the other hand, the outer border of the exclusive economic zone, and that has determined the scopes of our 3 regions. Next slide, please. The vision is, of course, a bit of a technical vision statement. As you see here, an example for the Gulf of Bothnia. I won't read it up, but I must say that defining the vision statements together with all the people that are responsible for marine protected areas is a really important step. And I can imagine that also in your region, understanding and capturing in your vision statement the relationship between, for example, poverty alleviation, local livelihoods, sustainable use and marine protected areas, and capturing that in a vision statement will be pretty important to ensure that full buy-in that you need from everyone. Next slides. The third step then is, and this is a more technical one, if we are about to define our conservation targets, how do we think about that? What are those key marine habitats and species that we aim to protect in our marine protected area network? Next slide, please. And we started on a pretty high level, knowing that our marine data were pretty impaired, if I may say so. We thought, what do we know about marine? And we knew that, well, it's pretty, on the highest level, it's pretty simple. We know the depth and we know the bathymetry. So what we could do at least is say, well, let's talk about shallow and deep, and the difference is there where the sunlight can penetrate. And let's talk about soft bottoms and deep bottoms. And that led us to delineating on the target level, shallow soft bottoms, shallow hard bottoms, deep soft bottoms, and deep hard bottoms. That's everything under the water. Now move your head above water. Is there anything else left? Yes, areas of particular importance of marine mammals and birds, and they're most of the time a bit like rocky outcrops, and that are perfect nesting areas for seabirds and resting areas for example, otters. Next slide, please. So in a cartoon version, that would look almost like this. You might click a few times. Yeah. So you can see how you move from shallow soft to deep hard and shallow hard And you see on top the areas of marine mammals, important for marine mammals and seabirds. We then move on to identifying nested targets. That's on a much more technical level and probably also more real when it comes to conservation. What we wanted to do is we wanted to define in the context of these targets, nested targets, and we wanted to keep it manageable. We landed on a total number of 50. We didn't want to exceed that. Mind you, we started with around 400, so getting down to 50 was an immense amount of work, believe me, and another piece of headache, as Jenny called it just now. As a principle, we decided that species are part of ecosystems, so we don't identify species as such, but rather habitats or ecosystems, and only tease out species if they warrant additional conservation action. And we wanted to select these nested targets based on existing priorities, and we wanted to focus on fulfilling existing legal requirements. And that's an important point. We have legislation all over the map, but we're hardly able to fulfill our current legal requirements. So that's our primary focus. Let's build a system to really do what we need to do. It's okay, Annie, you can continue. So what we did, and you don't need to read all these bubbles, just the darker green ones, we began with thinking through what are our legal obligations towards the EU. And then we moved on and said, now that we have them, is there anything in our regional conventions like HELCOM and OSPAR that is not yet named in the EU nature directives? If so, we added them to the list. And then we moved on to the Swedish priorities. Is there anything of importance for Sweden that is not yet on the HELCOM and OSPAR list, not yet in the EU directives? If so, it was added to the list. So we built kind of like a pyramid that allows us to avoid too much overlap and deliver on our requirements. Next slide, please. We use these nested targets, of course, to then really understand the status of our marine environment and to set concrete goals. Next slide, please. And that assessment of status was really hard. You can imagine that understanding how each one of these nested targets is doing is patchy at best, and often we don't know. So what we did is we did a massive piece of work in which we collated all the information that we could find, ideally local, but often regional, sometimes even global, anything we could find that could indicate, it could give some kind of indication of how these nested targets would be doing. And our logic was, we're going to use any available information. And if the available information is global and we have nothing on a finer level than that, then let's use that and think through why would that be different for our region. So we really try to incorporate all existing information, and often that was imperfect. What we did is we set up expert committees, different committees for each region, and they, if you will, vetted the different sources of information and added their own knowledge, regional knowledge, and made some kind of an assessment of the condition of each one of these nested targets in their region. Next slide, please. The goals were set on two different levels. You can click twice if you will. We have very generic goals for national and marine regions. We have more specific goals for counties, and you could carry them forward for each marine protected area. Next slide, please. An example of that could be, can you click twice? For example, a generic goal could be that the conservation status of mussel beds in MPAs is stable, and a growing proportion of that is in favorable conservation status. Is probably a term that you use as well, that is closely related to generic statements of status. A more specific one could be that in a particular county, in this case Blekinge, where Jenny is from, by a certain date, MPAs in this county together include X square kilometers of blue mussel beds. And then of that X square kilometers, at least 80% is in favorable conservation status. So that's a more precise numerical goal for them. Next slide, please. Now that we have goals and we understand a bit how each one of these nested target is doing, it's time to move on to setting protection objectives. And that's actually trying to formulate how much of what you need to have protected where. Next slide. That is, we used for that, you don't need to read this entire slide, but what is important is the top bar. We used for that 3 criteria: occurrence of a nested target, status of a nested target, and the biological value. With occurrence, we basically meant, is it very common all over the map, or is it very rare, just in very few places? Conservation status, of the information we have, do we have the feeling that it's doing very well, or is it really at risk of maybe even going extinct regionally or maybe even globally? And then the biological value, the importance to other species and ecosystem services, whether that is low or very high. So you can imagine that if something is very common, doing very well, and has very low biological value, that the proportion that needs to be protected is probably smaller than if it is in trouble, if it's very rare, and there where you have it, it's maybe in fair condition, but rapidly declining, and the biological value is very high, then you might want to consider maybe even to protect close to 100% of something. And that's what we were looking for, percentages of how much you need to protect of each one of these nested targets. Next slide. So applying this, for example, to coastal lagoons, it's fairly common. Coastal lagoons, conservation status is fair, so it's in trouble, but the biological value is very high. That means it has a weighted average of 3.3. Next slide, please. And that weighted average then helped us find a protection objective of 50%. So we set brackets for weighted averages, and we try to work with that. Next slide, please. This weighted average, of course, is nothing more than an informed decision. So regional experts really thought that through, if that made sense in comparison to other nested targets, but they also looked at if that needed to be corrected in the face of climate change. And that's another one of these things that is complex to take on board in MPA network planning, or in all conservation work, I guess. What we started with is trying to really understand the most likely climate scenarios. And what we see for the northern regions is that water temperatures are rising, sea ice in winter is melting, precipitation rates are going up, the salinity is going down. That's pretty obvious all over the map. It's only a debate of the speed with which this is happening. If you then look, please click, at the potential impacts on the marine environment, you see certain species really doing well because of this, other species in decline. You see the amount of oxygen in waters deplete, you see invasive species increase enormously, and with that come potential and real human responses. So the way that we act and use our natural resources is of course adapting to that marine ecosystem, and it has implications for fisheries, for shipping. For example, imagine sea ice disappearing, becoming very thin. It opens an area up for shipping and allows shipping lanes into areas with perhaps vulnerable species, using that area for reproduction in wintertime or in spring. So implications. So in short, that helped us, please click, adjust our protection objective to, sometimes, please click. Sometimes it became from 50%, 80%. Sometimes it became from 80% less than that, because climate change was favoring the particular nested targets. And often it had very little difference in the percentage, but it did help us think through if perhaps in certain regions we needed to create climate refugia, and in others focus on other elements, on bigger areas, for example. Next slide, please. The next step then was to try and wrap our heads around human use, because that's of course the thing that we are protecting these areas from. It's all about humans and trying to balance uses with what the ecosystems can provide. And one of the key things that we needed to wrap our heads around is how sensitive each one of these nested targets is to the human uses in this area. Next slide, please. It started with, as Jenny described, a pretty big headache in making a taxonomy, as we call it, a taxonomy of threats and related stresses. Can you click twice, Jenny? So for example, if you look at the second column, you see physical development and the associated threat with it we thought was physical loss of habitats, physical disturbance, changes in hydrographical conditions, disturbance of species and food webs, etc. And we did that for all the threats that occur in Sweden or are likely to occur in the coming 10 to 20 years. Next slide, please. We then plotted these on our nested targets, and we try to imagine what that really means and how vulnerable each one of the targets, in particular the nested targets, are to these identified direct threats. Next slide, please. And we try to make that assessment. It's based on a pretty serious piece of scientific work done in Mosaic, but also by the HELCOM Commission, the Regional Seas Convention. And we adapted it slightly, but basically we made a ranking of the potential impact of, in this case, the structures in water. You see that all the way in the left. So the building of bridges and roads and jetties and piers on sandbanks. Sandbanks are part of the shallow soft bottoms. And you can see that the impact in particular, like for example, physical loss is very high, and the inputs of impulsive sound is low. It's there, but it's low. That means that the ranking overall is very high because it follows the highest impact. So it's logical then that it's very high. This sensitivity analysis we've done for all the threats across all the nested targets. So that's been a pretty substantial piece of work. Next slide, please. And it helped us to define threat reduction and regulation objectives. So this sensitivity analysis has been key for that. And next slide, please. The threat reduction is very closely related to the regulation objectives, and both of them are very closely related to the sensitivity. So going back to my example of trawling in an area with coral, in a shallow area with coral, we would like the threat reduction objective to not occur. But if it is swimming, then maybe swimming can occur in some areas. So the threat reduction objective depends on the sensitivity of that particular nested target to that particular human use. And then, of course, the mirror of that is, what do you do as a government in terms of regulating that particular objective? Now, for example, trawling inside areas with coral reefs is prohibited, but swimming in some areas is allowed. So these are kind of like the categories that we've identified to develop threat reduction objectives and regulation objectives, and we use them to try and understand where in our marine protected areas we might have a problem. I'll circle back to that in a second. Next slide, please. Compiling the evidence-based is really important. This is not Jenny's daughter you see on the left, but this is a marine researcher that is doing monitoring. Next slide, please. We have done a substantial piece of work in trying to compile all the available evidence, and we've designed a dashboard. I apologize that dashboard is not available publicly. It is inside the IT system of the county administrative boards, but that might change at some point and become publicly accessible. What you see here is one of the many views that the dashboard has. You see on the left side that the box Botniske Viken is clicked. That's the Botnian Bay. You see below that the shallow soft bottom is clicked. So what you see on this page are all the nested targets that occur in the Botnian Bay that are related to shallow soft bottoms. The little orange lines are the protection objectives. So they tell us how much % the group thought that need to be protected in order to reach the goals. The blue bar gives us an indication of how much we think is protected today. And you see a lot of blanks, and that can mean two things. Either we don't have data or nothing is protected. And there are, of course, filters that differentiate between the two. But you can see clearly that for some of these targets, like, for example, areas with sedges, it's a bit more towards the bottom. You can see that we are protecting more than the protection objective would advise us to do. But when you move to others, we're far from our protection objective. Estuaries, for example, has a current protection rate of about 15, and we think we need about 50 in order to ensure that this nested target survives in the future. Next slide, please. Here's another view of the dashboard. It's a more complicated view. Same region, same shallow soft bottoms. But you see on one axis, you see the current protection percentage, and on the bottom, the protection objectives. That means that everything in the gray is meeting its protection objectives or even better. So you see 3 bubbles that are meeting their protection objectives. There are also a few that are not meeting their protection objectives. That's interesting because it gives you an idea of where you need, what kind of nested targets you need to represent better in your network. So if you're looking to expand your network, you might be looking for areas that contain these nested targets. If you're looking to improve the effectiveness of your area, you see 2 nested targets in the top of that gray triangle. They are most of what we know is protected, but still they're in poor or fair condition. So it means that the management is not effective. The question is, why not? How is the regulation? What threats are happening? What do we know about the sensitivities of these threats? Are we meeting the threat reduction objective? So we use that to really talk about improving the effectiveness of management. Next slide, please. These are then used for setting priorities. All this information of the dashboard. Next slide, please. And these priorities are for action. So you can set priorities to beef up your ecological representativity. Look for those nested targets that are underrepresented in your area. Next slide, please. You can look for functionality and the effectiveness of management by looking for those for which you do meet your protection objectives, but somehow are not effective. Next slide, please. You can look at, for example, trying to adjust your regulation, seeing if some areas, some uses are under-regulated, or maybe they are regulated and the regulation needs to be enforced, or maybe they are enforced, but people just don't have a choice. They need another way of making a livelihood or accessing an area. There is no other way for them to do it. So maybe we need to find a compensatory measure. Next slide, please. Of course, in these priority actions also lies data priorities. We have huge gaps in data, and we can spend the coming 500 years probably collecting data and still not know everything. So we need to set priorities. We think that good priorities for data gathering are to zoom in on those data for which we think conservation status is poor. We think that you can look for data on protection, on status, on threats and stresses. And to give you a bit of an idea, in Sweden, there are 90 nested targets for which we know how much is protected, and for which we also then know how much we have and where it is. But 18 of them, we don't know how much they are protected. We don't know where they are. We hardly know anything about them. We know that they're there, but not enough information to really make management decisions. So they can be good candidates for priorities. The same with data, 70 threats, we have data, 8 without. Yeah, so that gives a bit of an insight on where to look for your priorities for data. Next slide. And I'm almost there, 3 more slides, so bear with me. The last step, designing governance and adaptive management, is very, what we've done is very Sweden specific, and I'm sure that it's very different in different parts of the world. However, main principles apply. Basically, what we did is we designed a process, next slide please, in which we imagined who is looking at these management questions. If you're trying to periodically look at these management questions, are we protecting enough of the right things? Is there enough protection of species and habitats in the right places? Is the protection heavy enough? Is the intensity of human use in or outside marine protected areas, does it differ? How disturbed are our marine protected areas inside? What's the trend of our conservation status and species inside and outside? How do they compare? Are goals being met? What do we need to change? How can we make this network more effective? That set of questions needs to be on the basis of information from a dashboard, needs to be discussed with, in this case, representatives of different counties in the context of a regional, of a marine region, so one of these three marine regions, but also in Sweden in the context of the national network, which comprises of the three sub-regions. So to really think through who is at the table, who makes these decisions, how often do you meet, what data do you look at, etc., etc. That is all a piece of work that we did in this last step. And this is just a very high level summary of the governance structure that we are proposing. And this by no means has become reality in Sweden, but it's inspiration. It's being discussed now. As you see at the bottom, there's 3 regional councils. These 3 regional councils are for each one of the marine regions. They are comprised of representative of the regional counties and SwAM and the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency, but also of a member of the National Scientific Committee. And that National Scientific Committee for MPA Network Management governs the quality and the use of evidence in this decision-making on each one of the regional networks, but also is an advisor to the National Council. The National Council kind of like harvests the priorities from the regions and brings them to government and to make sure that, and not only to government, also in the context of a wider integrated marine discussion, for many different reasons. Next slide, please. So this has been a lot of, next slide, please. This has been a lot of information and I'm sure a lot of it is not new for you, but patched together, it's, you probably feel a bit run over by now. I apologize for that, but there's so much to say. And as Jenny said, we actually would like an entire day to talk about this with you. Main question, of course, to you is, can you imagine that you use a framework like this or potentially an elaborated framework? And we've done a bit of thinking in the context of the Western Indian Ocean marine region. You might want to add to it not only protection that leads to human activity being reduced or avoided, and the status of key marine habitats being restored. You might want to add to that the element of ecosystem services, and then how that contributes to human well-being targets, poverty alleviation targets, and you might want to add in, that's all the way on the other side of the model again, a sustainable use component. But so could you imagine that if we would elaborate a framework like this to the priorities in your region, that might perhaps be helpful? Next slide, please. And that it could help the countries of the region jointly deliver on these regional commitments. Next slide, please. And can you imagine that this framework and method might help you achieve more effective marine protected areas? Just as some food for thought. That's it for me. Thank you very much for giving me the time and being my audience for this story. I hand over to you, Xavi.
Thanks, Ilke, and thanks, Jenny, for the presentation. I think it was a very good example of the work done in the area. I've seen there's quite a few comments on the chat box asking for these documents to be shared. We will prepare them in a way that are light enough that we can download it easily, and everything will be included in a website, and you will receive the links to those documents, so you can revise them again and maybe come back with questions. We still have some minutes if there's any clarifying questions, any doubts, any comments on what's been presented so far on this framework, before we move to the other example from South Africa that will be presented shortly. So if there's anyone willing to share any question or comment, you can do either through the chat box or just raising your hand. We can give you the word to organize a bit the discussion. We have a few minutes for that. I guess we are a bit run over, as you were saying, Ilke.
Yeah, I can imagine.
That was very comprehensive and a good detail of the thinking. Okay. So yeah, we will share the contacts as well at the end of the call, so you can always reach to the speakers or to us, and we will try to solve any doubts that are. So I would then move us forward and ask Dr. Anne Oosthuizen, and I apologize again for the wrong pronunciation. Maybe you can help me now saying your name correctly. So if you could share your screen and explain and tell us about this initiative that you developed in South Africa to help you design and enlarge the network of MPAs. And I apologize because at the beginning of the presentation of the seminar today, we were talking about the framework for capacity development, and it's actually a framework to design and enlarge the MPA network in South Africa. So over to you, Anne, and thanks for being available for sharing your experience today with us. Thank you.
Good morning, Xavi, and thank you for that. It is a Afrikaans Dutch surname, and it's pronounced Oosthuizen. But you were close.
That was close. Thank you.
I just want to check if you can see my screen. Is it in presentation mode or not?
Oh, it's in editing mode at this moment.
Yeah.
Now it's good. Thanks.
Good. Good. Well, thank you for this opportunity to share what we managed to do in South Africa over the last 14 years. And what I'm going to give you is literally just a very broad overview of a very long, detailed and involved process. A lot of the steps that Jenny and Ilke touched on was part of our process. But because our process started so long ago, it really it is not such a nice, neat package that flows from point A to point B. So as some of you might know already, South Africa declared 20 new MPAs in 2019, and that was quite an achievement for us as a country. The process started in the early 2000s by different separate spatial planning initiatives around our coast, all by different organizations. What we did have in common, though, is that all of these initiatives were based on baseline research within these MPA or planned footprints, and all of them were based on systematic conservation planning. We were lucky in 2011 when we did a national biodiversity assessment, we had the first national marine classification and threat map developed for South Africa. So that was the first time we actually knew what was present in our oceans, and this was again updated in 2018. So this is the data that we need to have an idea of what is in the ocean. So how do you protect if you don't know what's there? So this was our first map. This process had protracted and prolonged stakeholder engagement throughout the period. And finally, we had some government intervention and declaration of these MPAs. So I'll go into a little bit more detail in some of these steps. So as I said, this wasn't a structured planned process. It happened more organically here in South Africa. So the first initiative started along our KwaZulu-Natal coast, and they looked at a provincial-based systematic plan. Then we had a couple of separate smaller systematic plans for our south coast, including for the MPA that I was involved with, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And then later on, we had a systematic conservation plan for our west coast. So for some of you that don't know South Africa so well, Cape Town sits below here where the green blob is. Port Elizabeth, Durban, and this double line is the boundary of our EEZ. And at the same time, we also had a large offshore marine protected area project ongoing, which was focused on a network specifically for the offshore area of South Africa. So in 2014, our president announced a blue economy program called Operation Phakisa. Phakisa means hurry up. And this was a very focused 2-year program to drive and develop the blue economy of South Africa. And this finally pulled all of these different initiatives together. So science was a very important part that all of these plans were based on, and I'm not going to go through it, but it's just to give you an idea what type of science we had, how it was distributed. It was everything from general biodiversity to fisheries data, EBSA data, etc. This is some of the outputs that we had. So this was our very first marine map of our benthic habitats in South Africa. This was the output in 2011, and with that went a pelagic ecosystems habitat map. And then we were lucky enough to, in between those years, do ongoing research, which managed us to update this in our 2018 NBA again. And you can see a lot more detail in the benthic habitat map in this later output. So without this, it would have been a lot harder to plan these MPAs. On top of that, we also looked at the human activities, and this is a threat map. So plus minus 25 industrial activities take place within our EEZ. This includes fishing, mining, shipping, and it covers roughly about 90% of our EEZ footprint. And you can see the darker areas are where most of these activities take place, and therefore would be the highest cost to place our MPAs. So that was all the science behind it. So let's look a little bit at the stakeholder engagement we did. So pre-Operation Phakisa, the stakeholder engagement was part of each of those individual processes along the coast. And then during Phakisa, it was a very focused program. Literally, the participants were locked up in a hotel for several months on end. And they were forced to, negotiate each of those different sectors' priorities within that time frame. So it consisted of labs, excuse me, and it covered sectors like oil and gas, fisheries, aquaculture, and then ocean governance and protection. And there were several iterations with these labs, and the MPA designs and sizes changed according to these negotiations. At the end of this 2-year period, we had ministerial sign-off from each of these sectors, and that gave support to our MPAs on a national level. So this enabled our Minister of Environment to start our legal process, and this is by gazetting each of these MPAs, which then resulted in further stakeholder engagement at each of those individual MPA levels. We had over 700 public comments and inputs, and a lot more concessions were made around these MPAs based on those comments. And then finally, we had the gazetting in 2019. It was lengthy, it was complicated, it was messy, and it was not easy. I think out of the whole process, your stakeholder engagement is always the most difficult part. So to give you an idea of some of the individual consultations, so for the offshore project I mentioned, you can see there's 19, and these are just the official stakeholder meetings with various sectors. The West Coast Plan, there was 10 meetings, the KZN or the East Coast Plan, over 20 meetings, and then within the PAKISA pre and post lab, over 20 consultation meetings. Then for the MPA that I was involved in, just a list of workshops, but essentially annual consultation on a regular basis. We had over 45 official consultations over 9 years. This is the first MPA in South Africa that had such intense engagement, and it's considered one of the best that we've had. And on top of that, we also received most of the public comments, and not all positive. They were all mostly unhappy comments. So there's a fine line between too much consultation and balanced consultation. So finally, in 2019, we had these 20 PAKISA MPAs declared, and you'll see the thin little blue bits along our coastline. Those were our original conservation areas. The green bits were the 20 new MPAs that were declared, and the white bits are some of the MPA parts that were negotiated in the last round and was left off the declaration. So this was quite an enormous feat, and we're very proud of what we achieved. We managed to move the protection levels in our EEZ from 0.4 to 5%. Still well below targets, but a major achievement from where we were. For my organization that I work with, we added 3 new MPAs, and we more than doubled our own footprint for marine conservation areas. This network took good condition areas of threatened ecosystems into account. It advanced the seabed habitat representation by 90%. It was the first protection for 10 of 13 critical ecosystems, and 14 of 16 open ocean habitats were included in this network. And this is all the targets that have come out of the systematic conservation planning that we managed to do. So in the end, we ended up with a fairly representative network in terms of habitat and process representativity. It is by no means perfect, but we made a very good start. and there is already planning in process to look at the next 5%, or at least start identifying the next 5% towards targets. So this was the very good part. We managed to get all these declared. Now what? So this is the difficult part, the implementation and the financing. Most of the coastal MPAs, so those MPAs that are attached to the coast, will be managed by existing conservation agencies at the coast who already have a footprint, but they all were already under budgeted for the pre-existing MPAs and now have severe shortfall for the new areas. The offshore MPAs will be managed by national government, and currently they have no allocated budget or resources for management. So significant shortfalls in budget for actual implementation, and of course this has not been helped by the current COVID that we find ourselves in. All national government budgets have been slashed, so it's a very, very difficult place to manage 20 new MPAs in. The drafting of the management plans are only starting now, and that's been further made difficult by not being able to do proper public stakeholder consultation. Many of our stakeholders are from poorer backgrounds. Not all have access to internet, so virtual meetings, you exclude 50 or 60% of your stakeholders. So a very hard thing to do in these times. Just as an example, these are just 3 of my MPAs for my organization, and this is the budget that we're looking at. These are shortfalls, and this includes new staff, new equipment. In some cases, we need new staff villages because the MPA is just so large that you need a new complement of 12 or 14 people. And of course, including research and monitoring to get that baseline information in place, because we have limited baseline information for most of them. Some of them we don't have at all. So just to give you an idea of what type of costs we're looking at. So some of our lessons learned, absolutely strong scientific foundation is essential. If you don't have a fine scale map of your MPA or a national ecosystem map or a pressure or human use map, you don't have a basis to negotiate with your stakeholders or to engage your stakeholders with at all. We couldn't have done this without doing systematic conservation planning. It gives you that option to balance your biodiversity and social targets. And then stakeholder, you need a decent analysis. So you need to know who your stakeholders are, what the interests are, and have a meaningful and tailored engagement. As I said, we have many poorer communities in our MPA, but then you deal right through the spectrum with industrial fisheries right down into international mining and oil and gas companies. So you need to tailor and structure your stakeholder consultation. And to have a coordinated planning, especially when national government gets involved, where your stakeholders are used to dealing with your conservation agencies on the ground, and to just make sure that there's no confusion when national government steps in. It's a very slow process. It took us 14 years. Many economic developments move faster than conservation efforts. So you lose a lot between when you start planning and when you actually have your MPA gazetted. So that's something to keep in mind. Adaptive management. We are way behind our WIO brothers and sisters. Currently in South Africa, there's no adaptive management implemented in our MPAs. In my organization, we have looked at adaptive management on the terrestrial side for the last 10 to 15 years, but even so have found that our legislative requirements are so restrictive that we cannot impart true adaptive management. Our management plans and all changes to management plans have to be signed off by the minister. So there is no way for us to quickly and easily adapt in for specific circumstances. Thank you. And happiness is having the MPA and 19 others declared after 13 years of hard work. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anne, for the presentation. I think that's quite an impressive feat to declare, even after these many years, 20 more MPAs for the country, and that's how it goes. That's reality. It's complicated. It's long, and it's still lots of work to do, and it happens all over the place. It's the same situation.
Yeah.
Terry posed a question just a few minutes ago on the chat box, asking for more details on the white-collar part of the MPAs. He was mentioning were they not surveyed enough? What would be the reason why they were not considered? I think you mentioned something, but if you could elaborate a bit more. Thanks.
Sure, yes. So a lot of those areas were negotiated either with the oil and gas sector or with commercial fisheries. So it was areas perhaps where they had not yet completed exploration, or particular hotspot areas for fisheries that were very important to them, and they were unwilling to relent. So it was either give up those areas or they would oppose the larger system. So it was really negotiated MPAs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thanks. Would there be any other question regarding the case from South Africa? Any other comments? No. There's been also an exchange between Tina and Ilke about the previous approach on the framework and the Sweden case. And I don't know if there's any other thing you want to add, Ilke or Tina, but you were asking Tina about if this process can go backwards, no? Can go from established MPA network and use this process as a tool to negotiate. I don't know, Ilke, if you want to add anything to the comments you were sharing with Tina on the chat box.
No, not really, except for that it's a brilliant question. And I think in a way, this is the same process as Sweden has. I'm pulling in Jenny as well. Perhaps you can elaborate, Jenny, but I think Sweden did exactly the same thing, starting with the existing marine protected area. But with the question is, does it all add up? Is the sum of the marine protected areas enough to, make a functional and well-connected network that can sustain key habitats in the future? So by tying it together, I think what we did is see the gaps and the shortcomings of the current collection of marine protected areas. I don't know, Jenny, if you can reflect on this.
Yeah, no, I just agree as well. This is the discussions we are still having, have had and are still having. And also now in Europe, we talk a lot about this OSMs and how to work with connectivity, to have functioning corridors and things like that. So it all comes in there, I think. It's one of the tools that need to be complemented by other measures. And we work also a lot in Sweden with marine green infrastructure, where it also connects, I think, very, very clearly. So we have to take that into consideration. Absolutely.
Any other comments or questions at this point? So yeah, Ilke?
I have one for Anne. Anne, you showed an impressive slide with budgetary requirements for implementing the the MPA network, in practice. Could you say a few words on what the process now is to try and secure this budget, or perhaps it is secured already, but where is that discussion? Because that's of course where the rubber hits the road, and it's a complex one that also for Sweden might be relevant.
It's a very difficult question. Us as a conservation agency, and the example I showed was simply for the 3 MPAs that we are responsible for. As the National Conservation Agency, around 80% of our revenue, of our operating budget for the organization comes from tourism. So, which of course was severely impacted over the last 2 years. So even our baseline budget that we worked from, say in 2019, which was just enough to manage our MPAs. And that's excluding the new areas, so it's only to manage our old areas. So that's been slashed tremendously. And now to have this tremendous shortfall for the new MPAs in current times is, I don't know where we're going to achieve that budget from. Our organization is looking at alternative funding options and sources, but generally all our MPAs within the country is funded through the national government, which most of you, I'm sure, are aware that South Africa's government is not in the strongest economic position. We have no idea where funding would come from to deliver on these MPAs. So as I said, for the coastal MPAs, we still have some capacity in place because of the organizations along the coast. But for the offshore MPAs, that will mostly have to be managed through cooperation with fisheries, trying to get these areas into their permit systems, vessel monitoring systems, etc. You're not going to have big patrol vessels out there checking these MPAs. Yeah. So, short answer, no, we don't know where we're going to get the funding from.
That's a complicated matter, how to finance and how to also get the buy-in, no, from our representatives, so we can prioritize. Because from one side we commit to certain objectives, and then it's difficult to deliver as conservationists without the proper resources. There's another comment from Sarah Frocklin. I don't know if you want to speak out, or I can read it. Sarah, you want to unmute and share your comment? If not, I can read it. Sarah is saying, given that IPLCs are, according to the IPBS analysis, they are great, or they should be good stewards of conservation, do you also focus on ICCS in your work, technical support? I guess this question would be to you, Anne. Sarah says she's in a car.
Sorry, can you just tell me what IPLCs are, please?
I think it's the inclusion of indigenous communities, local communities. That's what it's about, right?
Okay. In some of our areas, they support some of the local conservation organizations. But in most of the cases along the coast, that has not happened. I think the best example we have is our biggest MPA on the Mozambican, right on the Mozambican border in the north, is the St. Lucia Causey Bay system. where there is quite an intricate relationship with the indigenous people that live in the park and have certain rights in terms of that. But in general, in South Africa, our legislation is very poor when it comes to including traditional communities along the coast. In terms of what we've done with the 20 MPAs, they were all part of the stakeholder participation process and have been included in that way. But we don't have, and our laws at currently, it doesn't recognize things like LMMAs in South Africa.
Okay. Yeah, having the buy-in is also identified as one of the critical challenges for the region, and we aim to find inspiration from the region as well, and try to bring together in the next seminar a few experiences that can be, we hope, inspiring for the work we do in the region, how to get the stakeholders in the process of designating new MPAs. As well as including this information that we have more and more on climate change. So in the interest of time, I would move us forward and just start the closing. I would like to ask you if before we share the screen again, if you could, most of you, open up your video feeds. We would take a couple of pictures of the participants of the meeting today, so we can also share on the different channels the Nairobi Convention and SwAM are using. So please, if you can turn on your cameras and put a smiley face. Annette will help us with these and take some pictures. We are a lot, so we need to do probably into shots. But yeah, thanks. I see most of the faces now. Good to see you. All these online meetings are always kind of weird for us humans. No, I used to more physical contact, but we're getting used to it. So yeah, Annette, tell us when we are good, and then we'll move for the closing.
Yeah, just give me 1 second more, and then I'll be there. Okay, all good.
Fantastic. We can
take the
unfreeze
smiles off
now.
Feels like we're at the dentist.
Yeah, we are just smiling at the dentist. That's true. So yeah, as a way of concluding and just sharing last remarks, I would like to thank all the speakers today. Thanks to Jared, obviously, for hosting the meeting, but also for sharing this information about the Outlook report and all the challenges that we are more and more documenting and more aware of. Also thanking Jenny and Annette for introducing the SwAM Ocean program, to Jenny and Ilke for explaining the case coming from Sweden, the lights and shades of a process like this. We're working with real situation, and it's always a challenge that we all face. And also to Anne for explaining the case from South Africa and the big achievement of declaring 20 more MPAs recently in the country. I would like to thank all of you participants for being, all of us for making this really easy. We've been spending together quite a few hours already. It went well. You have 2 email addresses here, and I think Annette, you can probably copy them on the chat box.
They're in the chat box as well.
Okay, thanks for that. So in case you need to know more, you don't receive the message with the links to all the documents and recording that we did today, please contact Jenny or myself, and we will sort that out for you. I would also like to activate a really short poll. It's like 5 short questions that we would love that you answer for us. That will help us organize the next seminars in a way that it's most productive for us. It's activated now, so please free to click on the answer that reflects better your opinion on each of these, I think, 6 questions. And this, again, will help us improve for the next time. And yeah, while people are voting, and in the interest of time, I would give back the floor to Peter and then Jared to officially close the seminar. So again, thanks for your participation. Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I think it was a very interesting seminar. I'm really looking forward to continue this cooperation, and I hope that we from my agency could contribute with our experiences, and we have on this, if you say regional scale, we have a lot of experience from cooperation between 8 European countries and also with Russia in the Baltic Sea. And for myself and other colleagues, we have been working a lot with similar issues very closely with ISON in Southeast Asia. So I'm really looking forward to the continued work in this process. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter. Jared, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Savi and colleagues. We have come to the end of the introductory part of what will be a medium-term MPA capacity building program for the region. I want to sincerely, first of all, thank all the colleagues who were able to attend today and be part of this workshop. I know that among us are professionals, people who have worked, and done work around MPS for a long time. And it was great to have you, even when we have not had you, but I have looked at the names and I see colleagues here who bring in very rich experience in MPA management. I want to appreciate colleagues from SwAM. Actually, I remember the first time we interacted with SwAM in the region was when we invited SwAM to a regional MSP workshop in 2019. And since then, we are working very closely with SwAM in a number of initiatives, MSP and now MPS. And we believe that this is a growing partnership. And we look forward. I want to appreciate WIOMSA, who is a major technical partner to the convention. We work with WIOMSA in so many areas. I don't even have the time to enumerate. And we appreciate this very strong and firmly grounded partnership. I would also like to appreciate the experience that we have had being shared from Sweden and also from the region, South Africa, through Operation Pakisa. And thank you very much, because we believe that there are also very interesting experiences that can be shared in the region. We should have had an experience from the Seychelles on their ambition of declaring 30% of their EEZ as protected area. We will probably have that in the next in the next workshop. We will also have even formal experience sharing on the Mihari network as well, among other experiences. So my last comment is that I think we have a great opportunity here, because we are initiating this collaborative capacity building program in 2021, which is the start of what we are considering as a super decade, during which so many environmental agreements are converging globally. The SDG framework that is running until 2030, the Global Biodiversity Framework, also starting now for the next 10 years with enhanced ambitions. Of course, we have the Paris Agreement with the revised NDCs, among other commitments. So it is my hope that this capacity building program can actually play a role in enabling the region to make progress towards these global commitments that the governments have made. Otherwise, thank you everyone for participating in this meeting. And we will give you communication on the next workshops. We will also have consultation even before the next iteration of topics are finalized. And we are looking forward to your very active participation, colleagues. Otherwise, thank you very much for now. And I'm very happy that we have actually remained pretty much within the time that we had allocated for the workshop today. Thank you, Savi, for the facilitation as well. Thank you, colleagues. This brings us to the end of our workshop for today, and enjoy the rest of the day for you from wherever you are. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
The meeting is finished then.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
You can leave at our own pleasure.